This striking stone fortified tower is arguably one of the finest castle views on the whole island of Ireland. Looking out across fertile rolling lowlands, the vast tidal Strangford Lough with its hundreds of islands, and the stirring Irish Sea beyond. The tower's lofty, isolated, Gothic appearance made it the recent set for a famous televised fantasy drama. In reality, the origins of this fortified residence reach back to a brutal period of warfare, invasion and occupation, when rich Ulster land was seized and held by Anglo Normans as a source of income and regional power in the high medieval age. We begin our story by looking at the reasoning for, design and construction of tower houses in the Strangford area of eastern Ulster. These towers were defensive homesteads and administrative centres for the gentry level of society in Ireland. Castles were no longer the preserve of earls who ran entire provinces like Ulster, but of barons and lords with their allotted territories. These territories were often similar to a handful of our current townlands. Townlands not necessarily adjacent to each other, dependent on how land was parcelled out after military success or later inherited. In and around Strangford, these coastal tower houses protected the production, storage and logistics of a provincial import-export trade as well as the people who administered it. We read in Historic Monuments of Northern Ireland, an Introduction and Guide 1983, though the 1429 subsidy did not apply to the northern counties, the earliest tower houses in Down may date from quite soon after it. This subsidy was introduced by King Henry VI of England, a building grant of £10 to every man in the English Pale occupation zone around Dublin who wished to build a castle within 10 years. But the volatile and dangerous province of Ulster to the north fell well outside this zone. The earliest probably datable Strangford Tower House example is Kilcleef, near the coastline of Lecale. Lecale is a peninsula in East Down, once a native Gaelic Irish territory, then one county of a Norman earldom. Kilcleef was the residence of John Selly, who was Bishop of Down from 1429 to 1443, when he was ejected for living with Lettice Thomas, a married woman, in his castle. It was typical for bishops to have large, fortified and eventually palatial residences, lasting well into the 19th century. Ard Tulla, the opulent residence of the Bishop of Down, Connor and Dromore, at Holywood Town on the shore of Belfast Lough, being a good example. At Kilcleef, the tall beachfront castle has 4 floors. The first vaulted in stone to prevent fire damage to upper floors by attackers. 2 projecting turrets, one containing the spiral stair and the others a series of garderobes, or latrines as we know them. These projections are joined at roof level by an arch covering a drop hole for directing missiles at unwelcome visitors below, known as a machiolation. This kind of tower house is sometimes called the gatehouse type because of its similarity to a castle gatehouse. Also belonging to this early County Down Tower House group is the focus of our film, Audley's Castle, high on a rocky hill commanding the narrow mouth of Strangford Lough with Portaferry village opposite, also a tower house location. Audley's Castle has the remains of its outer enclosure or bawn stone wall clearly visible at ground level. Jordan's Castle, Ardglass, is also of the 15th century. The most imposing of a ring of towers built round the harbour to secure the important Anglo Norman trading port and provide safe storage space for merchandise. The Normans' primary goal in Ulster was to maximise returns from the land they seized and administered, trading produce across the sea to mainland Britain. The tower house overlooking the harbour at Portaferry has only one projecting tower, with the door protected by a machiolation in the angle between the main tower and projection. It was probably built in about 1500. We learn from a genealogical history of the Savage family in Ulster that a notable feature of all these tall, multi-storey fortifications was their ability to communicate with each other for security purposes. For example, Ardkeen Castle could communicate by beacon with those of Newtown, Castle Espey, Skettrick, Mahee Island, Killyleagh, Walchestown, Audleystown, Portaferry, Quinton, Newcastle, Ballygalget and Kirkeston. It is possible from a visit to tower houses, especially the roofed examples, to imagine something of the lifestyle of the inhabitants. Nowhere is this easier than in Audley's castle, where there are fireplaces, window seats, cupboards, latrines and drain holes for slops. It was probably much easier to live in comfort in a tower house than in one of the earlier large stone castles. There is certainly more concern for the functions and comforts of the inhabitants by their architects. The tower has one main room with an annex attached on each floor. The ground floor, with stone vaulted ceiling, was for storage of provisions and bulk dry storage of goods received as rents from the lord's tenants. The vault was created by placing stone and mortar over a shaped, wattle, wooden basket-like framework. This stone ceiling acted as a fireproof base, which prevented the building being burnt down by attackers. Most windows are arrow slits for defence. A larger first floor window may be a later modification. On this floor is a large cooking fireplace and access to a latrine toilet. This room was for entertaining guests, conducting estate business, adjudicating disputes, and possibly a dormitory for junior servants. The annex room on this floor may have provided a private estate office for the lord. There's a chute on the wall for ejecting waste outside, where it could be periodically cleared from the pit below. Remaining floors above were likely the private living and sleeping rooms for senior members of the lord's family. As time progressed, the tower became an increasingly personal family space, whilst other functions were performed in adjoining stone buildings or extensions. Attic rooms may also have contained provisions for warfare, as the top floor with its parapets was the primary fighting compartment of the tower house, where weapons could be focused from elevation at approaching enemies. The 16th century evolution of gunfire would change tower house design. Its accuracy and increased engagement distance somewhat negated the need for height and other defensive considerations, such as window frame design. Ironically, recastellation would become an architectural reversion in the 19th century, as wealthy gentry and even royalty chose to build or renovate medieval-style tower house residences as romantic and prestigious status symbols. One local example of this would be the 1850 Helen's Tower in Conlig, North Down, built by the first Marquess of Dufferin and Ava. At least two consecutive castles occupied the site. First, and very typically, the initial fortification to consolidate protection of seized lands was a motte castle constructed by scarping the sides of the rocky hillock where the castle stands. This would have been a wooden palisade-style fort. Within several centuries, a stone tower house was the typical evolution of a Norman baron's principal headquarters. The present imposing castle was built very much after the style of the castle of Kilcleef, which served generally as a model for many of the castles in Down for more than a century after its erection. We don't have an exact date for Audley's Strangford Tower House. John Audley was the owner of Audley's castle in 1586. We can see the castle of John illustrated in this 1595 map of Ulster.